Hey everyone, we're going to start with Unit 1, Chapter 9, which is Significant Contemporary Rights of Citizens, Rights of Consumers. The unit structure is divided into 10 parts, which are Objectives, Introduction, Consumer Protection Act, Consumers and Indian Contract Act, Consequences of Breach of Contract, Consumers and the Sale of Goods Act 1930, Consumer and the Essential Commodities Act 1955, Consumer and the Standards of Weights and Measures Act 1976, Consumers and the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act 1954, Summary and until end unit questions. The first is objectives. Modern world is known as age of consumers. The slogans like consumer is king have been in fashion for quite some time. Unfortunately, in India, the awareness about consumers' rights is quite low. This unit is aimed at giving students ideas about their rights as consumers, where they could approach if they have any complaints, etc. This unit not only covers the details of Consumer Protection Act, it also talks about various allied laws like Contract Act, etc. 9.1 Introduction. India passed Consumer Protection Act in the year 1986. This clearly means that before this act came, Indian consumers had no protection from law. Though there were laws like Sales of Goods Act in 1930, there was no specific law to protect consumers. Also, India, being a poor and largely illiterate country, protecting the interest of consumers is a big challenge. The unit will explain the students what are the consequences of violating Consumer Protection Act. 9.2 Consumer Protection Act. In modern world, consumers are regarded as king. But in India, the Consumer Protection Act came very late. In our country, the consumer movement started in the 1960s. But only in January 1986, this act was passed in our country, which has given Indian consumers some rights about the goods they purchase and the services they buy. It is interesting to know that such law has existed in advanced democracies like USA, UK for years. In the societies during the first half of the 20th century, the development of consumer welfare societies was established. Those days, the consumer was helpless. A helpless person who had no right against the manufacturers and unscrupulous traders who could often and easily cheat consumers. One must credit the USA for starting consumer right movement in 1927. Out of this movement came the Union of Consumer of United States of America, established in 1936. Years later, the President of USA, Mr. John Kennedy, outlined 4 rights of the consumers. Number 1, right to safety. Second, right to be informed. Third, right to choose. Fourth, right to be heard. This bill later became the base for many countries to follow. Then came the initiative from the United Nations, which had passed a resolution indicating certain guidelines under which the government should make laws for consumer protection. Since in developing countries, literacy levels and awareness levels are rather poor, such laws are all the more necessary. Our Act seeks to promote and protect the rights of consumers, such as A. Right to be protected against marketing of goods which are hazardous to life and property. B. The right to be informed about the quality, quantity, potency, purity, standard, and price of goods to protect the consumer against unfair trade practices. C. Right to be assured, wherever possible, access to an authority of goods at competitive prices. D. Right to be heard and to be assured that consumers' interests will receive due consideration at appropriate fora. E. Right to seek redressal against unfair trade practices or unscrupulous exploitation of customers. F. Right to consumer education. The mechanism for this purpose would be the Consumers Protection Councils to be established at the central and state level. Not only this, for speedy and simple redressal to consumer disputes, A quasi-judicial body is to be set up at districts, state, and the central levels. These bodies should function according to the principles of natural justice. This act was passed for the benefit of unprotected consumers. The idea is to create an inexpensive system for trial and disposal of consumer disputes. The law made in 1986 had to be amended in the light of changes that have taken place. Accordingly, the Consumer Protection Amendment Act 2002 was passed, which became effective from 17th December 2002. The important feature of this amendment was that it provided for establishment and composition of Consumer Protection Council at district level. Violation of Consumer Protection Act. The law has defined various concepts associated with this law. Concepts like complainant, consumer, complaint, medical negligence, etc. are explained in the Act. For instance, complaint means any allegation in writing made by a complainant against a trade practice or a restrictive trade practice which has been adopted by any trader, the goods bought by him or agreed to be bought by him, which suffers from one or more defects, the services hired or availed of, or agreed to be hired or availed of by him, which suffers from deficiency in any respect, where a trader has charged for the goods mentioned in the complaint a price in excess of the price fixed by or under any law for the time in force or displayed on the goods or any package containing such goods. If goods which will be hazardous to life and safety when used are being offered for sale to public in contravention of the provisions of any law for the time being in force, requiring traders to display information in regard to the regards of the contents. Manner and effect of use of such goods with a view of seeking any relief before the forum or commission as provided under the Consumer Protection Act. There has been an amendment to the Consumer Protection Act in 2002, according to which now the service provider is also required to display the list of cost of services rendered like the traders of goods. It is, however, necessary that the complaint must be supported by the documentary or other proper evidence. In the similar manner in this Act, all other concepts are exhaustively defined in legal terms. 9.3. Consumers and Indian Contract Act. The Indian Contract Act is one of the oldest acts in our country. This came into existence in 1872 and has been amended from time to time. Historically speaking, the word contract is derived from the Latin word contractum, which means drawing together. The word contract is normally used to describe a series of promises constituting the contract, documents constituting or evidencing that series or their performance, legal relations resulting from that series. In simple language, contract means an agreement between competent parties upon a lawful consideration to do or not to do some act which is binding. Here the word binding is quite important as it creates some obligations and some rights. If the contract is not performed, the consumers or manufacturers can go to the court. This is not a new issue. For centuries, people have been buying and selling goods and services. It also means the dispute about these issues are equally old. Sorry, I'm having a bit of cold and cough, so I pronounce a few words oddly. Okay. So it also means that the dispute about these issues are equally old. The Indian Contract Act takes into account all these issues and frames responsibilities and duties for manufacturers or service providers and consumers. Some of the important issues are as under. Number 1, the Indian Contract Act 1872 extends to the whole of India, except the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and has been in force since 1st September 1872. Second, an agreement not enforceable by law is said to be void. Number 3, an agreement enforceable by law is a contract. This shows that contract has force of law behind it. 9.4. Consequences of breach of contract. When a contract has been broken, the person who suffers due to such breach is entitled to receive compensation from the person who has broken the contract. However, while estimating the compensation, the means which existed of remedying the loss caused by non-performance of the contract must be taken into account. There is separate treatment for compensation for breach of contract where penalty is mentioned. In this case, the compensation is part of the contract. For example, there are two guys, Mr. A and Mr. B. Mr. A enters into a contract with Mr. B to pay rupees 1000 if he fails to pay Mr. B 500 on any particular day. Okay, he has to pay B 500, but if he doesn't pay it, he has to pay 1000 as a compensation. Unfortunately, Mr. A fails to pay rupees 500 on a day. In this case, Mr. B can very well recover a compensation of rupees 1000 from Mr. A, but it shouldn't exceed rupees 1000 because it is written in their contract. These are some of the examples that we face in our daily life. In addition to these provisions, there are many provisions in the Indian Contract Act which ensures smooth transactions in the country between the buyer and the seller. Some of the provisions of the Contract Act can be read to interpret the Consumer Protection Act. 9.5 Consumers and the Sale of Goods Act, 1930. While discussing the consumers and their rights, we need to understand some important provisions of the Sale of Goods Act which came into force in 1930 in India. Historically speaking, before the British settled down in India, there was no uniform law for sale of goods or movables in the country. There used to be many disputes about this. In 1870, the various branches of law were codified. This process got final shape in 1893. In the early decades of 20th century, a draft bill was prepared on the lines of the English Sale of Goods Act 1893. This was introduced in the Legislative Assembly in September 1929. It came into force from 1st July 1930. It extends to the whole of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So the important year is 1930 and the date is July 1st. The Act defines basic concepts like buyer, delivery of goods, price, seller, etc. The Act has detailed provisions about buying and selling activities between the buyer and the seller. For example, a contract of sale may be absolute or conditional. Similarly, there are provisions for protecting the quality of the goods or services. If the buyer expressly or by implication makes known to the seller the particular purpose for which the goods required, so as to show that the buyer relies on the seller's skill or judgment, there is an implied condition that the goods shall be reasonably fit for such purpose. The Act covers various aspects of buying and selling. For example, the sale by person who is not the owner. If the seller has sold goods he does not own or who does not have authority to sell the goods, in that case, the buyer does not get the title to the goods because it wasn't the seller's goods to even sell him in the first place, right? This too has an exception. The sale by an agent is valid as he is acting on behalf of the principal. Similarly, the Act specifies the duties of the buyer and the seller. It is the duty of the seller to deliver the goods and of the buyer to accept and pay for them, according to the terms of the contract of sale. Normally, the delivery of the goods and payment of the price are concurrent conditions. That is, the seller shall be ready and willing to give possession of the goods to the buyer in exchange for the price. And the buyer shall be ready and willing to pay the price in exchange for possession of the goods. If the seller delivers to the buyer a quantity of goods less than the contracted quantity, the buyer may reject them. In case the buyer accepts the goods so delivered, he shall pay for them at the contract rate. Similarly, quite often we encounter situations when the whole price has not been paid. In this Act, seller of such goods is described as unpaid seller. Such unpaid sellers enjoy certain rights. He has a line on the goods for the price and he is in possession of them. In case the delivery of the goods has not taken place, the unpaid seller has to withhold delivery and stoppage in transit where the property has passed to the buyer. When the contract is not fulfilled, suits can be filed for breach of the contract. If according to contract of sale, the goods has passed to the buyer and the buyer neglects or refuses to pay such price, the seller may sue him for the price of the goods. Similarly, when the buyer neglects or refuses to accept and pay for the goods, the seller may sue him for damages for non-acceptance. And if the seller neglects or refuses to deliver the goods to the buyer may sue the seller for damages for non-delivery. There are many such provisions in the Sale of Goods Act which Indian consumers must know. 9.6 Consumer and the Essential Commodities Act 1955. Theoretically, market is a place where the buyers and sellers exchange goods and services for a price voluntarily. This definition of market is valid even today, but somewhat inadequate. The modern state is committed to the welfare of the people. In this context, it means it must be active in marketplace to ensure that consumers get steady supply of essential commodities. If such intervention is not ensured, the traders' lobby could indulge in black marketing by hoarding the commodities. This is why we have the Essential Commodities Act 1955, which has been amended from time to time. Not only this, in India, 1980, India passed the Prevention of Black Marketing and Maintenance of Supplies of Essential Commodities Act 1980. The Act of 1980 is to control black marketing of essential commodities. Such laws are indeed necessary to ensure the steady supply of essential commodities like edible oil, milk, etc. This legal has been in existence from pre-independence days. The precursor of the Essential Commodities Act 1955 was the Essential Supplies Temporary Powers Act 1946. The Essential Commodities Act 1955 extends to the whole of India. The Act covers many commodities essential for modern living. Commodities like coal, drugs, cattle fodder, foodstuffs, iron and steel, petrol and petroleum products, components and parts, and accessories of automobiles, etc. are covered under this Act. Though this law has been made by the Parliament, each state government is authorized to make relevant changes in the Act to be applicable to the conditions of the particular state. Under the provisions of this Act, the state can control, regulate the price at which any essential commodity may be bought or sold. The provisions of this Act could be used to stop the excessive profit making by putting upper limit beyond which profit making could be considered as illegal and an offence. In addition to this Act, in 1980, we have also passed the Prevention of Black Marketing and Maintenance of Supplies of Essential Commodities Act 1980. This Act extends to the whole of India except the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Under this Act, the government gets the power of detaining a person who is acting in any manner prejudicial to the maintenance of supplies of commodities essential to the community. If the person is to be detained, has absconded or is concealing himself so that the order cannot be executed, then government can issue a warrant for his arrest. In other words, the purpose of these acts is to ensure that the people get a steady supply of essential commodities at reasonable prices. The traders should not be able to hold up the supply of essential commodities and make unreasonable profits. Modern government is duty bound to look after the welfare of the people. 9.7 Consumer and the Standards of Weights and Measures Act 1976. The Act has been passed to regulate interstate trade or commerce in weights, measures and other goods which are sold or distributed by weight, measure or number. The Act extends to the whole of India. The Act discusses important concepts like commodity impact form, dealer, export, false package, etc. The commodity in packaged form means commodity packaged whether in any bottle, tin, wrapper, or otherwise, in units suitable for sale, whether wholesale or retail. The Act ensures that every unit of weight or measure shall be based on the units of the metric system. The base unit of length, it shall be meter. The base unit of mass, it shall be kilogram. The base unit of time, it shall be second. So meter, kilogram and second for length, mass and time respectively. The government is empowered by this Act to appoint legal authority to ensure the compliance of the provisions of this Act. The government appoints Director of Legal Metrology and such other staff as deemed necessary to help the Director. The Director or any other person authorized by him has powers to enter any premises and search for and inspect any weight, measure, or other goods in relation to which interstate trade or commerce has taken place or is likely to take place. If the goods seized are subject to speedy or natural decay, the Director may dispose of such goods in such manner as may be prescribed. Not only this, every false or unverified weight or measure and every false package used in the course of any interstate trade or commerce and seized shall be liable to be forfeited to the central government. When a commodity is sold in a packaged form, the manufacturer must give statutory details in the prescribed format. These details cover number 1, the identity of the commodity in the package. Number 2, the net quantity of the commodity in the package in terms of the standard unit of weight or measure. Number 3, where the commodity is packaged or sold by number, the accurate measure of the commodity contained in the package. Number 4, the unit price of the commodity in the package. Number 5, the sale price of the package. The Act has elaborate provisions for export and import business. Any good to be exported must have 1, quotation of any price. 2, issue of any price list, invoice or cash memo. 3, indication of the weight or measure or number of net contents of any package on any label, carton or other thing. For the import purpose, the non-metric weight or measure is not to be imported. The article to be imported must conform to the standards of weight or measure established under this Act. When any commodity, machinery is to be imported from a country in which metric system of weight or measure is not in force, before importing, the importer shall make an endeavor to obtain the weight or measurement expressed in terms of the standard unit of weight or measure established under this Act. If any person uses any weight or measure or makes numeration other than established under this Act, shall be punished with imprisonment which may extend to 6 months, or with fine which may extend to ₹1,000 or with both. This is how consumers get further protection according to the provisions of this Act. 9.8. Consumers and the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act, 1954. In a poor country like India, the traders and merchants are quite prone to make quick profits by means fair and foul. This is why the food adulteration is rampant in our country. This is also why the importance of the Act of 1954, which was passed to prevent food adulteration. This extends to the whole of India. In India, many states have passed such laws to prevent food adulteration. Historically, the need for such law was felt in 1937, when a committee appointed by the Central Advisory Board of Health recommended such legislation. Now in India, adulteration of foodstuffs and other goods is an issue included in the concurrent list in the Constitution of India. This is why the central government can make an all-India law. By 1960, the inadequacies of this law came to surface. Like any act, This too has given definition of adulterant, adulterated, etc. Adulterant means any material which is or could be employed for the purpose of adulteration. Adulterated has been defined in an exhaustive manner covering all aspects of this issue. It also defines what is not adulterated. It says where two or more articles of primary goods are mixed together and resultant article of food is stored, sold, or distributed under a name which denotes the ingredients thereof and is not injurious to health, then such resultant article shall not be deemed to be adulterated within the meaning of the Act. This Act has also created various authorities to protect consumers from adulterated food. Under Section 4 of the Act, we have Central Food Laboratory. The central government can appoint one or more central food laboratories to carry out the functions entrusted to the Central Food Laboratory by this Act. Right now, there are 4 such laboratories in our country located at Kolkata, Mysore, Pune, and Ghaziabad. Some states come under each central laboratory. Under Section 3, we have Central Committee for the Food Standards. This committee advises the central government and state governments on matters arising out of the administration of this Act. Similarly, we have Food Health Authority, which looks after the related issues. The central government can ban import of certain articles of food. No person shall import into India any adulterated food, any misbranded food, any article of food for the import of which a license is prescribed, except in accordance with the conditions of the license, and any article of food in contravention of any other provisions of this Act. So, no person can import all of these types of food in India. Similarly, the central or state government appoints food inspectors for specific locality. These food inspectors have enough powers to ensure that adulterated food is not available in market. They can take samples of any article of food from any person selling such article, any person who is in the course of conveying, delivering, or preparing to deliver such article to a purchaser. A food inspector can enter and inspect any place where any article of food is manufactured or stored for sale. If he finds any malpractices, he can take appropriate action. There are separate provisions for offences committed by companies. If company has committed any crime under this Act, it shall be punished accordingly. When a person has been convicted under this Act, the article of food for which he has been punished shall be forfeited to the government. This shows the importance of this Act to protect the consumer in our country. Summary: though India passed Consumer Protection Act only in 1986, it does not mean the Indian consumer had no protection before. As we have studies, much before Consumer Protection Act was passed, there were laws like Contract Act, Prevention of Food Adulteration Act 1954, etc. This entire bunch of old laws, together with Consumer Protection Act 1986, has now empowered Indian consumers quite a lot. 9.10 Unit End Questions. Question number 1. Discuss the details of Consumer Protection Act and also explain how does consumer get justice when his rights are violated. Question number 2. Explain the rights enjoyed by unpaid buyer. Question number 3. What is an essential commodity? Explain how Act protect consumers about the supply of essential commodities.
Right to information. New era of transparency and accountability. Introduction. The Right to Information Act 2005, which came fully into effect on 12th October 2005, is one of the most significant legislation enacted by the Parliament in India. It is a major step towards more accountable and transparent government. RTI has been enacted to provide for setting out the practical regime of right to information for citizens to secure access to information under the control of public authorities in order to promote transparency and accountability. The Act will certainly lead to end the culture of governmental secrecy and fulfill its potential as a truly great democracy. Origin of the Right to Information Act 2005. The first and foremost well-known right to information movement in India was the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sanghatan (MKSS), an organization for the empowerment of workers and landless workers and rural poor, which began its right to information work in Rajasthan during the early 1990s. The MKSS started grassroots movement demanding access to government information on behalf of wage workers and small farmers who were often deprived of their rightful wages or their just benefits under the government schemes. Through their innovative concept of Jan Sunwai or public hearing, MKSS started demanding information from local authorities regarding the wages, muster rolls, materials used for the construction of roads during famine relief work. From the modest beginning in the villages of Rajasthan, the success of MKSS have been a source of inspiration for activists in India demanding the information from the bureaucracy and the government. The struggle of MKSS activists led to a nationwide demand for law to guarantee the RTI to every citizen, with widespread support from social activists, professionals, lawyers, and media who are committed to transparent and accountable governance and people's empowerment. The MKSS movement in Rajasthan was a turning point in the RTI movement and showed that even illiterate, socially mute, and exploited laborers could assert and get their other rights conceded by the invoking the RTI. The social movements in Rajasthan and other states led to the formation of the National Campaign for People's Right to Information in 1996. Various state RTI laws were passed during this period, including Tamil Nadu, Delhi, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Assam, Madhya Pradesh, and Goa. Finally, the National Freedom of Information Act was passed in 2002. However, this act was not notified, and the newly elected government, that is after general election in 2004, got the Right to Information Act passed in Parliament in 2005. Objective of the Act: to promote transparency and accountability in the functioning of the government, to set up a practical regime for giving citizens access to information that is under the control of public authorities, to empower the citizens as the law will promote the participation of the citizens in official decisions that directly affect their lives. The effective implementation of RTI Act will build public trust in the governmental functioning. It will lead to effective and efficient records management technique that is needed to facilitate the provision of information in response to public interest. What is right to information? Government information is national resource. Neither the particular government of the day nor public officials create information for their own benefits. Government and officials are trustees of these information for the people. The RTI Act enables the citizens to obtain access under the law to documents that may otherwise be available only at the discretion of government. The RTI Act 2005 provides effective access to information for citizens of India which is under the control of public authorities. This overrides the Official Secrets Act and similar laws and rules. The Act primarily envisages setting out a practical regime of right to information for citizens to secure access to information under the control of public authorities in order to promote transparency and accountability in the working of every public authority. Right to information means the right to information accessible under this Act, which is held by or under the control of any public authority and includes the right to inspection of work, documents, records, taking notes, extracts or certified copies of documents or records, taking certified samples of material, obtaining information in the form of diskettes, floppies, tapes, video cassettes or in any other electronic mode or through printouts where such information is shared in a computer or in any other device. Every information held by or under the control of a public authority is accessible to a citizen unless information is exempt from disclosure. What is accessible under the law? Information means any material in any form, including records, documents, memos, email, opinions, advices, press releases, circulars, orders, logbooks, contacts, reports, papers, samples, models, data material held in any electronic form, and information relating to any private body which can be accessed by a public authority under any law for the time being in force. The process. Application has to be submitted in writing with prescribed fee to Public Information Officer PIO. Citizens can submit applications personally or by post, in writing or through electronic means in English or Hindi or in the official language of the area to the Public Information Officer, that is PIO, specifying the particulars of the information sought for, along with the fees as may be prescribed if not belonging to the below poverty line category. Reasons for seeking information are not required to be given. Proof of receipt of RTI application. Applicant must retain a copy of application for RTI given to Public Information Officer with signature of Public Information Officer for its receipt in any of the following ways: given by hand, by registered mail, by speed post through a postal department services. There is a 3-level regime for receiving information. The first level officers are designated by every public authority to receive applications from citizens. At second level, senior officers are designated by every public authority to look into those applications of citizens where the information sought for is refused by first level officers. If information sought is refused or supplied information is unsatisfactory to the applicant, he has every right to make an appeal before Departmental Appellate Authority DAA of the same department. At the third level, the state government sets up an independent State Information Commission SIC. This SIC is empowered to monitor those cases where the applicants are unsatisfied with DAA's decision. SIC is also empowered to impose a fine of Rs 250 per day up to a maximum of Rs 25,000 if application is not received with any reasonable cause, and can also recommend a disciplinary action. Information has to be provided within 30 days and 48 hours where life or liberty is involved. Every PIO will be liable for fine of Rs 250 per day up to maximum of Rs 25,000 for non accepting an application, malafidely denying information, delaying information release without reasonable cause, knowingly giving incomplete, incorrect, misleading information, destroying information that has been requested, obstructing furnishing of information in any manner. Definition of public authority. Every body or authority created by any law operative in the country, either of the central government or the state government, shall be a public authority. The entire government machinery, the ministries, the departments, and every organ of these ministries and departments shall be public authorities. In crux, every authority which is managing anything in the country on behalf of government is a public authority, and the citizens can request for information from these bodies. The entire institution of self-government in India, the Panchayati Raj, is also public authority. Through this process of accessing information, citizens can participate more directly in the administration and governance of society. Features of right to information. The Act extends to the whole of India except Jammu and Kashmir. All citizens shall have the right to information, subject to provisions of the Act. The RTI empowers the citizen to ask any question or seek any information from government authorities, be it central, state, or local governments. It shall apply to public authorities, which means any authority or body or institution of self government established or constituted by or under the Constitution by any law made by the appropriate government, or any other body owned, controlled, or substantially financed directly or indirectly by the appropriate government, and includes non government organizations substantially financed by the government. The Act lays down the machinery for the grant of access to information. The public authorities are required to designate Public Information Officer and Assistant Public Information Officer within the 100 days of enactment to accept the request forms and provide information. The Public Information Officers or Assistant Public Information Officers will be responsible to deal with the requests for information and also to assist persons seeking information. The Act envisages creation of an independent, non-judicial machinery with Central Information Commission, State Information Commission. Legal framework of exercise of powers by the Commission is defined in the Act. The Act also provides the two-tier appellate forum. First appeal is to be made to the departmental officer senior to the Public Information Officer. The second appeal is to be made to State Commission. Fee will be payable by the applicant depending on the nature of information sought. Time limit has been prescribed for the compliance of information depending upon the information requirements. Certain categories of information have been exempted from the disclosure under Section 8 and 9 of the Act, like conduct of international relations, security of the state, trade and commercial secrets, intelligence agency, etc. Central Information Commission and the State Information Commissions monitor the implementation of the Act and prepare an annual report to be laid before the Parliament or state legislatures. RTI and transparency and accountability in government. Democracy requires an informed citizenry and transparency of information, which are vital for its functioning, and also to contain corruption and to hold governments and their representatives accountable to the governed. The greater the access to the information, the greater would be the responsiveness of government to the needs of the people. Without information, people cannot exercise their rights and duties. RTI is a major step towards more accountable and transparent government. It will certainly lead to end the culture of governmental secrecy and fulfill its potential as a truly great democracy. The Act provides for setting out the practical regime of right to information under the control of public authority in order to promote transparency and accountability in the working of every public authority. The promulgation of this Act set the stage for the transparency in the functioning of the government and its various agencies. Under this Act, access to information from public agency has become a statutory right of every citizen. Ordinary citizens do not have much information about how decisions are made and how public resources utilizes. Right to Information Act is a vehicle for greater transparency about the manner of the functioning of public agencies. Before this Act, the accountability of public authority was practically minimal. By this Act, the citizens can now question, audit, review, examine, access government records, acts, decisions to ensure that these are consistent with the principles of public interest, good governance, and justice. This Act promotes transparency and accountability in administration. The Act provides for framework for promotion of citizen government partnership in carrying out the programs for the welfare of the people. When the government is transparent, there is less chance for corruption and more room for accountability. People feel more powerful. Their bargaining power vis-a-vis public official has increased manifold. The Act has definitely resulted in a greater transparency in governance. The Act has become a powerful instrument for citizens and social activists to access information from the bureaucracy and thereby ensures greater accountability and transparency in decision making. The Act aimed to concentrate power in the hands of the citizens who may demand, even without giving a reason, any information which they think will help them exercise their rights more effectively and take an informed decision. Furthermore, even the judiciary has liberally interpreted the provisions of the Act, thereby making the public authorities more accountable. For instance, in Shyam Yadav versus Department of Personnel Training, the Central Information Commission held that property statements filed by civil servants are not confidential and information can be disclosed after taking the views of concerned official as per the provisions of the RTI Act. Success stories. There are innumerable inspiring stories about the RTI Act, reinforcing the belief that power in democracy is concentrated in the hands of people. In 2006, 70-year-old rickshaw puller from Bihar filed as RTI application with the help of a local NGO. He wanted information connected to his application under the Indira Awas Yojana, a national housing scheme. The block development officer, on receiving his application, handed over him a check of Rs 15,000, his first installment under Indira Awas Yojana. In 2007, Vaishnavi Kasturi, a visually impaired student, was denied admission in the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, one of the country's premier management institute, despite her impressive score at the entrance examination. She wanted to know why and wondered whether it was because of her physical disability. She filed RTI application to request the institute to disclose their selection process. Although she failed to gain admission to the institute, her RTI application meant that IIM had to make its admission criteria public. In 2008, information obtained through RTI application by NGO based in Punjab revealed that bureaucrats heading local branches of the Indian Red Cross Society used money intended for victims of Kargil war and natural disasters to buy car, air conditioners and pay for hotel bills, among other things. Local courts charged the officials responsible with fraud and funds were transferred to the Prime Minister's Relief Fund. In another case, the Indian Railway Pensioners Association, Bhavnagar Division of Western Railway, who since 1997 were submitting hundreds of representations to General Manager Western Railway and DRM Bhavnagar to get the payment of pensioners. Total 137 specific cases of non-payment were filed in the Pension Adalat, but nothing happened. When a request under RTI Act 2005 was submitted to CPIO, Western Railway accepted the liability for making payment and all the division of Western Railway were advised to take immediate step for making payments. The Janawat scam, known as mother of all rural development scams in Rajasthan, was exposed through the Right to Information Act. In the 1990s, the Janwad Panchayat in Rajasthan district began spending over rupees 1 crore fund annually, out of which over 70% of the money was siphoned off by a corrupt nexus between Sarpanch and the government officials. The scam was exposed by villagers who used their right to information to nab the culprits. A government dispensary in the district was at the heart of the scam in Janwad Panchayat. Though it was built in 1960, but in 1995, the then Sarpanch siphoned off nearly 2 lakh rupees claiming to be a new building. 2 years later, the Rajasthan Information Act made it compulsory to display on Panchayat offices the details of all development works and villagers soon caught the corrupt Sarpanch. Government took tough action against the corrupt Sarpanch and he was jailed and 13 government officials involved in the scam were suspended. Annual social audit of Panchayat funds were made mandatory. Thus, citizens are using RTI Act in everyday life problems like recovery of pending insurance policy dues, obtaining ration cards, tax refunds, provident funds transfer, school and college admissions, and public issues like maintenance of public places like gardens, roads, corporation budgets, transport services, etc. The challenges. The general awareness amongst people about the RTI Act and how it is to be used for their benefits is still low. There is lack of sincerity on the parts of government officials in providing the information. Information commissioners have time and again cited lack of manpower required to comply with all the provisions of the Act. Lack of necessary infrastructural facilities causes delay in providing information, especially in rural areas. The cases of misuse of RTI Act are also increasing. The PIOs are not adequately trained about the different provision and rules of the Act regarding procedures to be followed in disseminating information. The PIOs has the same old colonial mindset and they try to guard every information and working in secrecy under the Official Secrets Act. These bureaucrats deny information to the citizen to save themselves from criticism and feel uncomfortable with the notion of transparency. Attacks on RTI activists have also been a major deterrent in the RTI movement. There are no provisions to protect the applicant. Summary. The RTI Act as it stands today is a strong tool to uphold the spirit of democracy. The Act is influencing the people to come forward and question the progress on various welfare schemes creating positive change. The true potential of RTI Act is still to be explored, especially in the rural India where villages find it very cumbersome to file RTI applications. A little more stimulation by the government and other enlightened and empowered citizens can augment the benefits of this act manifold. The catalytic role of the government and the NGO in implementing RTI Act needs to be appreciated and supported by the people at large. The real and true governance can be achieved not by the acquisition of authority by a law, but acquisition of capacity by all to resist authority when abused.
Public interest litigation. Unit structure. 11.0 Objectives. 11.1 Introduction. 11.2 What is public interest litigation? 11.3 What is public interest? 11.4 Need for public interest litigation. 11.5 Who can file public interest litigation? 11.6 How to file public interest litigation. 11.7 Jurisdiction of public interest litigation. 11.8 Some success stories. 11.9 Abuse of public interest litigation. 11.10 Summary. 11.11 Keywords. 11.12 Unit and questions. 11.13 References. 11.0 Objectives. After studying the unit, you will be able to know the meaning of public interest litigation, to understand the concept of public interest, process to file public interest litigation, need for public interest litigation. 11.1 Introduction. Public interest litigation is an important instrument of social change. It is working for the welfare of every section of society. It is an institutional initiative towards the welfare of the needy of the society. The term has become common currency panacea for all bills, be it human rights violation, consumer protection, personal liberty, environmental degradation, right to life. It has now become the characteristic feature of higher judiciary in India. The PIL develops a new jurisprudence of the accountability of the state for constitutional and legal violations adversely affecting the interest of weaker elements in the community. What is PIL? 11.2 According to Black's Law Dictionary, public interest litigation means a legal action initiated in a court of law for the enforcement of public interest or general interest in which public or class of community have pecuniary interest or some interest by which their legal rights or liabilities are affected. PIL in simple words means litigation filed in a court of law for the protection of public interests such as pollution, road safety, protection of ecology, violence, etc. In India, PIL is not defined in any statute or in any act. It has been interpreted by judges to consider the interest of public at large. PIL was introduced in 1980s under the aegis of Justice P.N. Bhagwati. PIL in India has been initiated by some judges of Supreme Court themselves. According to Professor Upendra Bagchi, PIL movement is primarily judge-led and even judge-induced in India. The movement began in the aftermath of the emergency in aid of the dispossessed and deprived and came to be known as judicial populism. PIL is a group-oriented action. It involves the questions of injustice pertaining to a group. It is a litigation which vindicates a right of the large number of people, perhaps millions, or redresses a wrong done to them. The expression of public interest indicated something which the general public or the community at large has some pecuniary interest or some interest by which their legal rights or liabilities are affected. The word litigation means a legal action including all legal proceedings initiated in the court of law with the purpose of enforcing a right or seeking a remedy. Check your progress. Question number 1. Define public interest litigation. Question number 2. What is public interest? 11.4. Need for public interest litigation. The traditional conventional judicial process in India is described as colonial legacy unsuited to our conditions. After independence, the poverty, social and educational backwardness, financial constraints and other obstacles prevented the citizens from approaching the courts. Earlier in Indian law, citizens whose fundamental rights had been infringed had the right to approach the Supreme Court under Article 32 of the Constitution. But PIL has relaxed the rule and now NGOs, public-spirited citizens or any other organization can approach the court on the behalf of the people who belong to class of poor, deprived, women or children for the protection of their rights. It is in harmony with the objectives enshrined in 39A of the Constitution of India to protect and deliver prompt social justice with the help of law. It is working as an important instrument of social change. It is working for the welfare of every section of society. It is used as strategy to combat the atrocities prevailing in society. It is an institutional initiative towards the welfare of the needy of the society. It has helped the people who are poor, ignorant, or socially or economically disadvantaged positions to protect their fundamental rights. It is a device which enables the citizens to participate in judicial administration and makes judicial process democratic. PIL has enabled the individual social groups NGOs to approach the courts of country seeking legal remedies and justice in all cases where the public interest is at stake. PIL is people-friendly procedure. The intent of the PIL is to ensure redressal to those who are otherwise poor to move to courts and are unaware of legal procedure. The PIL was created to empower ordinary citizens to write a letter and draw attention of the apex court. Judicial action initiated through such petition has brought relief to a wide variety of cases and has been taken to action against the political corruption and accountability. It seeks to draw the attention of the authorities to their constitutional and legal obligations. The greatest contribution of the PIL has been the accountability of government towards human rights of underprivileged. The PIL enables the civil society to not only spread the awareness about human rights but also allows them to participate in discussion-making process. In Bandhu Morcha versus Union of India, Justice Bhagwati explained the nature of PIL. PIL is not in the nature of adversary litigation, but it is a challenge and opportunity to the government and its officers to make basic human rights meaningful to the deprived and vulnerable sections of the community, and to assure them social and economic justice, which is significant tune to our constitution. Justice Bhagwati further observed that the primary focus of PIL in India is state repression, governmental lawlessness and administrative deviance and exploitation of disadvantaged groups and denial to them of their rights and entitlements. 11.5. Any public-spirited person, NGO or any other organization can file the public interest litigation in Supreme Court or High Court in India. Any public-spirited person, even a foreigner, can file a PIL on behalf of the others, but this is necessary that only the person who is filing a PIL should not get any benefit. Any public-spirited person, NGO, or any other organization can file the public interest litigation in Supreme Court or High Court in India. Any public-spirited person, even a foreigner, can file a PIL on behalf of the others, but this is necessary that only the person who is filing the PIL should not get benefit. Meaning, thereby, any PIL whoever is filing should be only and only in for the benefit of people. If only one person is getting affected by any act, then that is not ground of filing PIL. Check your progress. Question number 1. Bring out the need for PIL. 11.6. How to file PIL. A PIL may be filed like a writ petition. However, in the past, the Supreme Court has treated even letters addressed to the court as PIL. In the early 90s, courts had treated a complaining postcard as PIL. It is different from ordinary litigation in that it is not filed by one private person against another for the enforcement of personal justice. A PIL can be filed when there must be a public injury or wrong caused by the wrongful act or omission of the state or public authority. This is just like a writ petition, which it is filed in Supreme Court under Article 32 and High Courts under Article 226. PIL can be filed against central, state government, municipal authorities and not any private party. There is a fee for filing the PIL and its hearing proceeds are also just like other. 7.7. Subjects of PIL or jurisdiction of PIL. Professor S.B. Sathe has summarized the extent of the jurisdiction which is being exercised by the courts in the area of PIL in the following words. 1. Where the concerns underlying a petition are not individualistic but are shared widely by a large number of people, like bonded labor, under trial prisoners, prison inmates. 2. Where the affected persons belong to the disadvantaged sections of society, like women, children, bonded labor, unorganized labor, etc. 3. Where the judicial lawmaking is necessary to avoid exploitation, like intercountry adoption, the education of the children of prostitute, etc. 4. Where the judicial intervention is necessary for the protection of the sanctity of democratic institutions like independence of judiciary, existence of grievances, redressal forums. 5. Where the administration decisions related to development are harmful to the environment and jeopardize people's right to natural resources such as air or water. There are various areas or subjects where PIL can be filed. 1. Violation of human rights of poor, deprived, women and children. 2. Compel municipal authorities to perform a public duty. 3. Content of conduct of government policy. 4. Violation of religious rights or other basic fundamental rights. 5. Matters of harassment or torture of persons belonging to SC, ST or EBC either by villagers or by public. 6. Matters relating to environmental pollution, disturbances of ecological balance, drugs, food adulteration. 7. Maintenance of culture, forests and wildlife. 8. Bonded labor matters. 9. Exploitation of casual laborers and non-payment of wages to them. 10. Petition from right victims. 11. Matters of neglected children. 12. Sexual harassment of women at workplace. 13. For maintaining roads, severe and good condition. 14. Protection of public places like gardens and playgrounds. 15. Banquet hall playing or loud music in night causing noise pollution. Check your progress. Question number 1. Enumerate the process to file PIL. Question number 2. Discuss the subject. 11.8. Some cases. A. Missing children of India. Advocate Sarvamitra filed an PIL in Supreme Court demanding the direction to the centre and all the state governments for tracing 55,000 missing children in country. Agreeing to hear the PIL, a bench headed by Justice Aftaballam sought response from the centre and states on the issue of missing children. The petitioner Sarvamitra claimed that almost all the states have failed to solve kidnapping of 55,000 children by organized gangs. The state has failed to investigate the cases of kidnapping and had failed to trace the missing children, which is total denial of right to life and liberty of these innocent children. B. Installation of unauthorized mobile towers. Ashish Kumar Singh, an advocate in High Court of Jharkhand, filed PIL against the installation of more than 400 unauthorized cell phone towers in the city of Ranchi without the permission of proper authorities. Children staying close to such towers, which receive and emit electromagnetic waves, were bound to lose power of retention and result in memory loss. The petitioner demand immediate action against the telecom companies and also direction from the court to remove such towers installed without proper authorization. Acting upon the directives issued by the court of the PIL, the Ranchi Municipal Corporation decided to act against companies that have installed mobile phone towers atop buildings and other places without seeking the mandatory no objection. C. Fast track courts. In January 2013, in the aftermath of Delhi gang rape case of paramedical student, retired IAS officer Promila Shankar pleaded in her PIL with the Supreme Court to direct the government to set up fast track courts in all states for expeditious trial of rape cases. The bench headed by Chief Justice Altammaz Kabir agreed to hear the PIL seeking the direction to the government to ensure safety of women and for fast track court proceedings in all rape cases. She also submitted the cases of rape and crime against the women and to be investigated by lady police officials and trials to be conducted by lady judges. Acting upon the PIL, the court has issued the directive the government to consider the system fast-track courts to ensure speedy justice to victims of rape cases. D. Vehicle parking at Shivaji Park. A Mumbai-based NGO, VCOM, which claims to represent the residents of Shivaji Park, and two citizens filed PIL in Mumbai High Court stating that the government as civic body have not declared Shivaji Park and its vicinity as silent zone. As per the Noise Pollution Regulation and Control Act 2000, also the PIL contends that although Shivaji Park has been declared as Kridastan, a playground or open ground, it is very often used for non-sports activities like festivals, political rallies and on several occasions for car park. A bench of Chief Justice Mohit Shah and Justice S.C. Dharmadhikari restrained the civic body from permitting parking of vehicles including four-wheelers only except the one who are used for cleaning the playground. The High Court had also restrained the local police from granting permission for use of loudspeakers of any kind at functions in the park at night. The court also directed the municipal corporation to notify the iconic Shivaji Park ground and its periphery as silent zone. PIL, as it has developed in recent years, marks a significant departure from traditional judicial proceedings. It is now venturing in formulation of policy which the state must follow. People now accept the courts to issue directions to the legislature and executive through PIL on matters which are functions of the legislature and outside the ambit of judiciary. 11.9. Abuse of PIL. PIL today has largely become publicity interest litigation, private interest litigation, or political interest litigation. People are approaching the courts through PIL on matters which are outside the domain of the courts. It has become a tool in the hands of the powerful and the influential. Number of frivolous cases has been filed in the courts through PIL. It has been noticed that such as important jurisdiction is blatantly abused by filling some petitions with oblique motives. The abuse of PIL has become more rampant than its use in genuine cases and causes. PIL has become a tool of harassment in some cases as cases could be filed without paying heavy court fees. The credibility of PIL process is now adversely affected by the criticism that the judiciary is overstepping the boundaries of its jurisdiction and that is unable to supervise the effective implementation of its orders. It has been also increasingly felt that PIL is being misused by the people for their private interest or for seeking publicity. Check your progress. Question number 1. Write a note on misuse of PIL. 11.10 Summary. Public interest litigation is for any public interest. The expression public interest indicated something which is general public or the community at large has some pecuniary interest or some interest by which their legal rights and liabilities are affected. It is an instrument of social change. It has certainly helped in drawing the attention of the courts, government authorities and society towards the problems of poor deprived cases in India. PIL has proved a boon for the common men in our society. But some cases of abuse of PIL have been reported. There are various cases in which PIL is misused. There must be a screening process while filling the PIL. Heavy fines must be imposed on frivolous PILs. The courts must refrain the passing orders that cannot be enforced unless a suitable mechanism is formulated to prevent the filling of frivolous PIL. The entire object of public interest litigation and judicial activism will be 11.11 Keywords: litigation, public interest. 11.12 Unit 10 questions. Question number 1. Discuss the need for public interest litigation. Question number 2. Enumerate the process to file the PIL. Question number 3. Bring out the role of judiciary in PIL movement. Question number 4. Bring out the subject area of public interest litigation. Question number 5. Suggest some measures to control the misuse of PIL. Question number 6. PIL is an instrument of social change. Discuss. 11.13 References: Vadera Basantlal, Public Interest Litigation, a handbook with model public interest model format. Publishing: Universal Law Publishing, New Delhi. 2. P.K. Gandhi, Social Action Through Law Concept. Publishing Company, New Delhi, 1985. 3. Sampath Jain, Public Interest Litigation, Deep and Deep. Publication